Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Today's webinar is titled, So You Have Bike Data, Now What? And here at the League of American Bicyclists, we're really excited to open this virtual National Bike Summit session up to a broader audience. We want to really send a very big special thank you to EcoCounter, our partners in this session. They're not only a sponsor of the summit and of the Bicycle Friendly Community Program, but they put together this really awesome session for you today. And we're really grateful to Matt and the team at EcoCounter for doing that. Today is a great lineup that I'll let my friend and colleague Matt Ainsley from EcoCounter introduce all of our speakers, but my name is Amelia Neptune. I'm the Bicycle Friendly America Program Director at the League of American Bicyclists, and in case you weren't aware, today's session was originally going to be a live in-person session at the 2020 National Bike Summit, which was supposed to be here in DC last month. Of course, because of coronavirus, that event was canceled and moved into an online format. So we've been having a series of webinars hosted over the last several weeks with all the great content that was supposed to be in person. But one of the silver linings of moving to the online format is we were able to open up some of the sessions to a broader audience, including this one. So we're really excited that so many people were able to join us, and thanks for being here live. If you're watching the recording later, thanks for watching. If you are watching live, we invite your questions throughout the session. All the attendees are on mute, but you can type in questions at any time through the chat box. So just type those in and we'll have time for Q&A at the end, which I'll be moderating. And if you are a registered summit attendee, you'll also have an extra opportunity to engage with the speakers through the online National Bike Summit Hub. So you should have gotten an invitation to that last week. And again, registered summit attendees, please log in, ask questions, engage with the speakers. It's not quite as good as a happy hour during the live National Bike Summit, but it's the best we can do given the circumstances. Again, I want to thank you all for being here today, and a huge thanks to our speakers for being flexible in shifting to this online format. We're really grateful to you all for your time and expertise that you're sharing today. And again, huge thanks to EcoCounter for putting this together. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt, and he will be doing the intros. So bear with me for just one moment. And Matt, you should see the share screen in just a second.
Well, thank you very much, Amelia, for introducing the session, and welcome everybody to today's webinar session, So You Have Bike Data, Now What? The virtual session of the National Bike Summit. And as Amelia mentioned, the National Bike Summit last month was moved online, was moved virtual. So I'd like to first thank the League and Amelia for all of their hard work getting this together in the past month under very difficult circumstances, and have really made something really great out of a challenging situation. I have a really good session for you today. It's a bit of a follow-up session to a webinar that we did with the League last year, which was titled Collecting and Applying Bike Data, Current and Future Trends. That was last September. And so, yeah, my name is Matt. I work at EcoCounter, and with over 20 years of experience, EcoCounter is the leader in automated bike and pedestrian counters. And that involves the designing and manufacturing of bike and pedestrian counters. We work with cities large and small to develop those bike count programs, from big cities with advanced count programs such as San Francisco or New York City, all the way down to small cities who maybe have their first bike lane or thinking about developing cycling infrastructure. And then from there, we enable a data-driven approach to bike and pedestrian planning. So our speakers today will draw on their experience applying bike data, and we have a really great lineup from a variety of different perspectives. First, you'll hear from Josh Roll. Josh is the Active and Sustainable Transportation Research Coordinator at the Oregon Department of Transportation. You will then hear from Terry Lansdell, who is the Executive Director of BikeWalk North Carolina. And finally, you'll hear from Phil Lasley, who is the Associate Research Scientist at Texas A&M Transportation Institute. So speakers will have 10 to 15 minutes to talk about how they're using bike data. And then after that, we'll have a 10 to 15 minute question period. So please add your questions to the chat box, and we can keep it as conference-like as possible. Maybe say who you're addressing your question to, and perhaps say who you are as if you were raising your hand during the conference. And with that, I will turn it back to our first speaker, Josh, to give your first presentation. Thank you.
Josh, I think you're muted still, but we can see your screen, so thanks.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Looks like you can see sounds like you can see my screen. Okay, so thanks to the organizers for having me present today. We've been working on a number of things over the years, utilizing the bicycle counts, and so I'm happy to share a bunch of what we've been doing over the past few years. I'll talk through a bunch of items that we've accomplished since around 2012 when we first started doing counts, or at least when I first started doing counts, and kind of tell you the genesis story of all that, and work through a bit of the more advanced uses of the data that we've put into place. A little bit about me. My background is from the travel modeling side. I've also done land use modeling and air quality modeling and big greenhouse gas strategic planning models. And so when it's come to utilizing these data, my perspective has typically been along more systemic uses of the data, or uses of the data for more systemic analysis. And there's some limitations to that, but I think what we've been doing is making the most of the data and helping to highlight some really big picture outcomes for bicycle and bicycle travel. So going all the way back to roughly 2012, I probably should have put a range on this element too, but I was tasked early on for the Central Lane Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO for Eugene Springfield here in Oregon, where I used to work before I worked at ODOT. I was tasked with updating the travel model to better account for bicycle travel. Traditional trip-based travel models really don't do much with estimating non-motorized travel. They generate trips, but they don't assign them, and so we don't really know how infrastructure projects might impact bicycle trips and bicycle trip making. So we utilized some research done by Joe Broach, Jennifer Dill, and John Glebe out of Portland State University that tracked bicyclists using GPS devices back in the days before smartphones were so ubiquitous and everyone had a GPS device on them. They used some Garmin devices, tracked a number of bicyclists, and analyzed route choice preference information, how far people were willing to go out of their way to avoid streets with lots of vehicle volume and high speeds, and avoiding hills and getting on comfortable off-street bike facilities. With that, we got to the point of applying that, and it was a considerable amount of network data development, and a theme that I'll try and highlight a bunch throughout this presentation is the importance of good network data to make the most use of your traffic counts data. But doing a better job of assigning our trips in our travel model led us to the point of needing counts and calibrating the model. And we didn't have any. We had a few 2-hour counts at a smattering of locations, and so that's when that was sort of the beginning of my maybe slog is a negative word, but of getting into the traffic counts, the traffic counts world. And so we purchased some portable counters and began counting at cut lines so that we could try and calibrate the model. Turns out trip-based travel models and some of the survey information that go into it make it really hard to accurately forecast and predict where bicycle counts are at, and so or where bicycle traffic is generally happening. And so we're not going to do a big survey for another year or two. And way back then, we knew that big survey was another 10 years off. And so we finished the route choice implementation and just moved forward, with the mindset of trying to use the counts themselves to better estimate bicycle traffic across the network. And so the next slide here is I'm going to try to describe the set of work using what's called a facility demand or a direct demand model approach. This approach is pretty old, actually. It was one of the first ways that we tried to estimate travel activity of any sort of vehicles at the beginning across the network. And so what this approach uses is we just look at where our counts are at and try and relate those using like a regression technique, regression model, relate our counts to the facility type, whether it's a bike lane, functional classification, whether it's a local street or an arterial, and then try and fuse them with other data about the network, about accessibility, things like network density. How many, is the link where you've counted on a part of a denser part of the network where there's more local streets or more intersections? Using network centrality, how important are the links in your network to the rest of traversing the network from one point to the other? And then accessibility, really looking at how on a link basis, not necessarily like a household basis, which is how I think we usually consider travel accessibility, but for a link, how many jobs can you get to? How many, in this case, in the graphic, how much of the university population can be accessed? Putting all these together, we can get a reasonable estimate of activity, or our model works relatively well. We can estimate and project those estimates across the network. And for Eugene Springfield, we're then able to estimate bike miles traveled across the network and start to use those in other analyses around crash safety and health, which I'll talk about in a moment. But one of the challenges that we had with the Central Lane project at the time was we did not have a network of permanent counters. We only had one. If folks who know anything about traffic factoring, taking your short-term counts and estimating an annual count, you need a permanent counter to associate your short-term counts with, so you can factor up to the annual amount from your week or 2 weeks or what of data. In Central Lane, we did not have that advantage, and so what we did was we tested using daily condition information like weather and temperature and whether it's a weekday or weekend to estimate the annual values, the annual traffic values. And we published a paper in 2017 using this method to just do the traffic factoring. And it's relatively accurate. If you have, say, 6 weeks of data, you can usually get within 5%. And this set of charts is just showing some of that error across the number of weeks in your training set. So it's relatively accurate. It's a solution to the issue we had of not having permanent counters, and this work really informed some of our thinking around traffic data imputation, which I'll talk about in a moment. So now that we can estimate a relatively accurate amount of bicycle traffic across the network, what do we do with that? We can certainly use that as a performance report and just say how many bike miles traveled every year. But we can continue to have questions about how to prioritize investments across the network in terms of risk. And now that we have a sensible measure of bicycle traffic, we can calculate risk. So the chart I'm showing here is just taking our bicycle injury crashes by functional classification and normalizing those crashes by our activity measures. And what we see is that the risk across the system compared to motorized transport there's a considerable disparity, something that we all kind of feel, I think, when we're out riding on the system. But and there's been some research that's done this in the past using different types of data, travel surveys. But this is getting at being able to, for the Central Lane region, show that disparity versus, bicycle risk, bicycle crash risk versus motorized crash risk, and then show that how that is spread across the system and how our local streets are our safe places to ride, and that risk grows as the vehicle volumes and travel speeds for vehicles increases. We're also able to use these travel activity inputs into safety performance function development. Safety performance functions are some of the kind of gold standard of safety systemic crash screening methods out of the Highway Safety Manual. There aren't good bike or PED SPFs in the HSM version now. And so what we're able to show using developing SPFs for segments, developing for intersections, different types of intersections, are some of those same things that I showed at the aggregate level in the previous slide, that in this given chart, showing that risk varies depending on the functional classification again. And then a key thing is that as bicycle volumes increase, the risk does decrease. And I think for one of the intersections models, we showed that an increase of bike travel from 25 bikes a day to 100 decreased the risk by half. And so these are important, I think, analytic tools to help tell the story about where the risk is across the system. How do we mitigate risk? Just by getting more people out there biking, but then also how do we prioritize investments by applying our SPFs using like an empirical Bayes methodology. One of the most impactful outcomes of this set of research, I think, to a lot of stakeholders was the healthcare cost savings that we were able to calculate. So kind of doing a counterfactual scenario where we say no bicycle traffic occurs on the system, and plugging that into the ITHM model, which is the Integrated Transport and Health Impact Model, a model that was developed out of England, and uses a relative risk model of being able to show what the burden of disease is with different amounts of physical activity. And so using those burden of disease changes and plugging that into a cost of illness model, subsequent cost of illness model, we're able to show what the deaths avoided are, and what the other what are called disability adjusted life years, which is a wonky public health measure of burden of disease. How we can show the impact of the existing activity and the subsequent healthcare cost savings. At least $3 million a year, likely more depending on the certainty of our activity estimate. Moving forward, getting out of the central lane related work, all that's been documented. It's on a report on ODOT Research's website. I'm happy to share links to that after this. But moving past that, we started another project in 2018, trying to kind of recreate what was done in central lane, but also do it for PEDs. Create a data collection system. Make sure a lot of it is automated as possible. And so what we've done there is, using some of the tools that EcoCounter has provided with their API access, organizing a system where we have a contractor log information about their deployment of their temporary counters, putting it in the where they put it, pulling all that data together, doing automated data error checks, and then doing automatic annualization was one of the big elements of the work now that we're doing out in Bend, Oregon. And this is just a graphic trying to show some of that process flow. This is resulting in, I've written what I'm calling sipper, like soda, like beer, sipper, the counts processor in R, where hopefully this will be an open source project that folks can download and if you're familiar with R, hopefully get up and running quickly to do a lot of these same processes. I know EcoCounter provides a lot of support too, and so I think there's some differences in some value going for one application versus the other. But we're showing some of the neat. In Bend, we're collecting in a lot of places bikes, PEDs, and motorized vehicles, and so we're trying to, we can, with that information, we can show some of the pictures that you've probably seen elsewhere, where we can show mode share on given facilities. This is just a picture showing how mode share at a given cut point in Bend changes over the course of the year. At the low point, maybe it's only 2%. Of the traffic moving through a corridor is non-motorized, but during July, during the nice season, nice weather, when tourists are in town, that mode share rises up to over 10% in some cases. Another element of this research that we're advancing and building on some of the seasonal adjustment regression model stuff is this is kind of updating our data imputation process. Whereas before we're using a negative binomial regression, now we're moving to the point of using some machine learning techniques, which has some advantages. I'm sure whoever, who's ever had a permanent count station and is frustrated with not being able to calculate as accurate of an annual average because their data goes out. I'm showing here in the top panel. These are our techniques we're developing these techniques that should be relatively simple to apply to fill in those gaps and give a reliable estimate of annual volume, even if our sensors go down or something happens that we don't get the data. And I realize that EcoCounter is also starting to provide some of these services, so it'd be interesting to compare methods at some point. Following the same number of outcomes that we produced in Central Lane, we're looking to develop facility or direct demand models for Bend, using some of those same characteristics about the network, access, density, information about the link itself, whether there's a bike lane or it's an off-street path, and use those to estimate volume across the network. The graphic on the right is a map of Bend with one of our preliminary models estimating volume across the system. One of the new things we're doing in Bend is incorporating Strava data and looking at trying to incorporate the bike share data. This should help improve our models. Theoretically, Strava, though a sample of a certain type of user, should still give us, I think, helpful information to train our models. And that's the other thing that's new in Bend, is trying to apply some random forest and XGBoost machine learning algorithms to help improve model performance. And similarly, using those estimates of activity to show and highlight disparities of risk across the network. So the chart at the right shows the bicycle crash risk for injuries and severe injuries in the top and bottom panel across, defined by level of traffic stress, which is, a measure of essentially vehicle volume and speed, and facility presence, and a couple other things. ODOT applies the LTS method pretty for a lot of our projects, so it's a nice way to look at the quality of the facilities. And what we could see here, just looking at this chart, is that level of traffic stress 3 and 4, higher volume, higher speeds, the crash risk in Bend is also higher. And that even, for LTS 1 and 2, even though it's remarkably less of a crash risk than LTS 3 and 4, it's still as dangerous or as risky as some of your highest risk facilities for motorized transport in the blue bars. So having counts, being able to estimate activity measures across the network, allow us to demonstrate the crash risk at a more aggregate, at least at this aggregate scale. So that's work the information I've covered so far is, work that we've done in Central Lane and Bend, trying to make the most use of our counts, apply them in more systemic fashion with activity estimation, and then using those in crash analysis and health analysis. With the real quick amount of time I have left here, I just want to talk about two ongoing efforts. One that I am not an investigator on, but leading I'm the chair of the Technical Advisory Committee. The National Institute of Transportation Communities is graciously helping to fund a pooled fund effort with Oregon and Virginia DOT, Colorado DOT, DC DOT, Utah, the Portland Bureau of Transportation, Central Lane, and Bend are also contributors to this, where we're hoping to build out some of these data fusion techniques, these direct demand models, and develop a framework that's applicable to others. It'll be an open source framework for how to take your counts data, how to take if you have Strava data, if you have other third-party data sources like Streetlight, bike share, how you can combine those to estimate activity across the network. How many counters do you need? Where should they be? Those types of questions will hopefully be answered, and the project will end next year in March, about a year from now. And then real quickly, another effort that the Oregon Department of Transportation is working on in collaboration with the national labs is their multimodal traffic state estimation tool. This is a very similar idea of putting together these big data to try and estimate travel activity across the network. What they are currently doing at the Pacific Northwest National Lab is doing travel times for vehicles. And so they're currently looking now to try and incorporate other types of data from the non-motorized world to estimate non-motorized types of traffic. So, you know, I think the takeaways for me are that these data can be really useful if we can apply them in a more systemic fashion. There are certainly lots of good examples of using them on a facility or a corridor level. The work that I've been involved in has mostly been these bigger picture analyses. But they, you know, at the very end of the day, and especially in a place like Bend, where we've actually had lower numbers than Central Lane because it's a smaller community, there's just less non-motorized activity, we can still show that there are people using the system, and that's really important. Highlighting these crash risk disparities, I know some folks will look at these graphics of these graphics of disparity between bikes and vehicles and say, well, geez, you're going to scare people away from biking. And that's, you know, I don't think the way to approach those types of research results. I think it's to show that, you know what, we've been investing in vehicle transportation networks for 100 years, and things are pretty safe compared to some of our other users. And so it's time that we continue to shift resources to make the system safer. And then, of course, all the other reasons, the co-benefits of more non-motorized traffic. I'm going to leave it there because I think I'm over time anyway, but I'm happy to answer any questions at the end and take questions offline. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to hand over presenter mode while you're talking, Matt. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you very much for getting us started with that, Josh. That was a really great high-level perspective of all of the hard work that has been done by you, your team across Oregon. And I think that you're bringing up safety and volume and the impact on healthcare is particularly relevant to the theme of this year's National Bike Summit, which is safe streets for everyone. So I think that's a great way to get us started. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Terry Lansdell, who comes to us from an advocacy perspective. Terry is the Executive Director of BikeWalk North Carolina. That is a statewide advocacy organization for bicyclists and pedestrians. BikeWalk works through education, advocacy, and promotion to make it safer and more accessible to walk and bike for transportation, recreation, and health. Terry has been Executive Director for nearly 2 years now, and on a personal level is an accomplished distance cyclist who has competed in 4 solo Race Across America events and also in the Race Across the West on a fixed gear bicycle. And he has a bicycle behind him too. So Terry, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Matt. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to start off with this one of my favorite quotes. Hopefully you guys can see the screen. It's an important part of what we do, trying to create an active transportation network that's sustainable. And we're so grateful for the opportunity to be here today, and appreciate the kind words in the introduction. As we begin, we're going to kind of dive down. Josh was incredible in providing the amount of detail, not only at the high level, but really get into the granular data. It's good to hear those words when you're managing large data sets. But for us as an advocacy organization, we're going to be talking a little bit about where's a good place to start, some quick wins, and some opportunities. So we want to thank everybody who was involved in the project, this data collection project, from streetlight data, as we see on the screen here, Populous, Strava, all of these partners on the software side, the data collection side, are going to help us manage the data and present it in a way that's going to be effective at the local and state level to talk about the importance of projects and active transportation projects, not only in particular cities, but across the state. Can't do it without EcoCounter, the products that they're providing, the traffic counts. We actually have a speed radar gun so that we can monitor traffic volume and speed, as well as a still camera for the facility as well. So what are we doing with our project and what we are going to do with the data? So when we began our project and outlined the partnership with Spin and EcoCounter, we wanted to understand what a new project was, what it was, how it was impacting the community, and who could we partner with to begin to collect data that wasn't done in a traditional way. And that's why this project is so important to us. So we're working as a statewide organization with a local organization who received the same grant. So we're going to be able to have a data stream and a data collection function that maybe is at a different level. It's not just a point in time and a point in location. And I'll speak more of that once we get into the project. We're also layering in a conversation with interns. Hopefully, the coronavirus issue has caused a different dynamic in how we will proceed with interns over the summer. But that data collection project is still going to go forward, and we've had interest beyond the official channels to participate. So we're excited about that. So we want to start with a little bit on the policy side. So complete streets is something that we've been driving in North Carolina for several years now, trying to get that policy up at the highest level of our North Carolina Department of Transportation and at the state level, so that we don't just build roads for cars, but we build roads for people. We've got several opportunities as we look at data. The favorite one that relates to the previous presenter, Josh, is that if we could take one traffic trip off the road and replace it with a bike, 1 mile of bike travel, 218,000 tons of CO2 would be removed from the air every year just in North Carolina. So dealing with climate change and the impacts from the coronavirus, we're seeing that a direct relationship to transportation, climate change, and air pollution. So why North Carolina? I think that when we look at our state, we see a real situation that there's not a good county, there's not a good region in the state that's not safe for cyclists and pedestrians. Where we are in Charlotte, in the center of your screen there, we have one of the most deadly congressional districts in the nation for bicyclists and pedestrians. So we're hoping to use this data that we're going to be collecting on a specific project, and it's called the Uptown Cycle Track. This is a quick overview of a diagram of the project itself, and we're going to be stationing our cameras and monitoring devices at the endpoints of this project so that we can start collecting data specifically on this project to indicate whether the project's being used for throughput, so for someone who is traveling along the project at the beginning and exit the project at the end, or whether people are using the project for something else as a destination source because of retail or residential engagement along the corridor. This is pretty important for us in how we design and are designing our data collection piece for a quick win and for a good place to start. We've got a brand new project and we're trying to see how people are using it and coming up with a real-time, real-world data collection piece. We chose this project because we have a program at the state level and local level here in Mecklenburg County in the state of North Carolina called Vision Zero. And in Mecklenburg County, in the city of Charlotte, we have a high injury network mapping feature. I can share that link in the comments after I get done, or if you want to follow up with me, I'll share that with you as well. But the 6th Street project, part of the reason why it was targeted for creation was that it was on a high injury network. So that means it was one of the most dangerous streets in Uptown Charlotte. And we wanted to kind of understand that if we have a project improvement, we would be able to indicate a reduction in the prioritization for the high injury network. And you can see here in this slide that our 6th Street is the orange and the diagonal going from top of your screen to the bottom as part of a larger connected high injury network. So we're trying to create a path of safety through a very dangerous area. So again, what we want to try to do with the project, with this data collection piece, is to really take a look at this new project. And this is the project as it sits today. So we have a separated facility that is a bidirectional facility on a one-way road. We want to take a look at what the traffic speed is associated on this road. We want to take a look, as I had said earlier, how people are using this facility. This type of facility is becoming more common in North Carolina and promoted in many MPOs and RPOs and departments of transportation as a safety solution for cycling and as a pedestrian buffer as we take back the space on our roads for these types of safety facilities. So we're very excited about having a traffic count feature associated with that this project, and partnering with another group who has the same products. What we hope to do in the future is to create a library of technology that we can transplant to individual locales across the state. So what we envision after this project is complete and we submit data and resources to our local Department of Transportation is to be able to take that technology, those monitoring devices, the traffic counters that EcoCounter has provided, and transplant them to other localities, Asheville, Raleigh, Wilmington, and other cities across the state that are having these types of projects. And also have them available to document the pre and post project implementation. So we're trying to have that data piece be part of the conversation to enhance our advocacy efforts to allocate and reallocate funds associated with these types of projects. So those are the next steps for us. So that's, now that we have data, what are we going to do with it? Well, hopefully the first thing for this project moving forward is to create a usage profile. The second thing is to create an opportunity to lower the risk and crash rates associated with these types of facilities pre and post the implementation, and also to talk about the quick wins for the community, that right off the bat we're having a safe place for people to begin to cycle again, to begin to walk and to use the roadway that is not in a motor vehicle. And that's what we're working hard to try to do here in North Carolina with our data collection piece. With that, I want to make myself available for any questions a little later on in the webinar. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Terry, for providing a perspective. It's really appreciated to hear the hard work that's been done by advocates, and in particular, the focus on quick wins and really just having the data to support the work that you're doing. So yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective. So our last speaker today is Phil Lasley. Phil Lasley is an associate research scientist at Texas A&M Transportation Institute. He has been actively involved in mobility analysis, congestion mitigation, performance measurement, and transportation policy for over 5 years. He is a leading key researcher for TTI's Transportation Policy Research Center, a think tank-like research center working specifically with the Texas legislature on projects of state interest. Phil's current work examines the housing, location, choice, and transportation, looking at why people choose to live where they do and how transportation concerns impact that decision. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Phil, and I think to Phil's dog too, who is also in the room. Go ahead, Phil. Phil, I think you're muted.
Howdy, from Austin, Texas. Thank you for the introduction, Matt. So just a little bit about me. So I have my origins in strategic management. That's kind of where I come from. I have a business degree, and that's kind of where my passion is. But when I got into planning, I got into a lot of fields that are very data heavy and rely on data-driven solutions in order to make policy decisions. And through all of those things, I kind of stumbled my way into bicycle and pedestrian issues, specifically with collection, quality control, factoring, and use, and much of what we've talked about today. One of the things that I get asked a lot here in Texas is why collect data in the first place? It's a very common question, but what this shows is if you have to ask that question, there's a piece of the puzzle that you're missing. It shows that there's a disconnection between how data is used and how it relates to policy solutions that can solve issues in your community. So I want to share a couple of principles through this presentation to kind of help make those connections. And the first one is to always have a reason that's explicit for why you have your data collection process in the first place. If you have these principles, or if you have these reasons written out and very well articulated, it's much easier to make this connection with a policymaker or with somebody in a different department in order to support any data collection efforts that you have in the first place. So we need to know more about bicycle and pedestrian usage in general. We know about a lot about how cars work, but in the biking and ped world, it's a lot different. There's a lot of information that we don't know. And in order to do that, we need to understand the problems and anticipate future needs in order to identify solutions, and all through that tracking trends. So we need to know what information is unique to biking and ped, what do we need to collect, and part of that actually translates into principle number 2, into understanding your organization and how it works. If you don't understand your organization and how it works, then collecting data is going to be much more difficult because, again, you have pieces and people throughout the process that don't know what the data is for. I work a lot with TxDOT, and Bonnie Sherman, who is the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator, has done an excellent job finding places within TxDOT where count data can be used. So here you see several different places, and this list is not exhaustive, of where we can use bicycle and pedestrian data within the TxDOT planning process, all the way from project planning and initiation through preliminary engineering, letting, construction, and post-construction activities. So let's talk about, you do your counting. What do you do with your data afterwards? This is a piece where people often get kind of tripped up. They get really excited about counting and collecting data, but ultimately a lot of that data goes unused. And there's several reasons why. A lot of times the data is not organized and it's hard to actually just open the file. When you use certain types of counters, you often get a data file. You know, a year worth of data could be over 100 megabytes or sometimes into the gigabyte range. Microsoft Excel can't open that file, or if you can, it's very difficult to work with. A lot of people don't know how to use databases or just basic database functions when you're dealing with that much data. A lot of times there's no validation or quality control of the data. So once you have the data and you start looking into it, a lot of people often just use it and don't think much to quality control the data, or look at areas where you see these high spikes in counts, but it turns out that those spikes are in error. It's very difficult to do the basic aggregation of the data. We're not all statisticians, and there are some basic statistics that we can use, but there's a lot more power with the data if you can have some basic aggregation or usable statistics built into your system somehow. There's generally very few reporting mechanisms. So once you have the data, how do you get that data and that information and statistics out to people who can use it? And then finally, there's no easy way to collect and share data from other people with other people. Here in Texas, there's an issue where TxDOT does very little collection of its own bicycle and pedestrian data because we don't have to. And because of that, the local areas and the MPOs have actually done a majority of their non-motorized data collection. But what TxDOT has done is they said, you know what, people in the local area know best how to use their data, what data they need, and they know best of what's happening on their streets. So let's keep control with them, but then find ways to aggregate it into other more statewide uses. And so the third principle is we need to create mechanisms to be able to process and handle large amounts of data. And here in Texas, we have worked with TxDOT to create the Texas Bicycle Pedestrian Count Exchange, or the BPCX. And what this is it's a collaborative tool that we've created with TxDOT to gather in all of those disparate data sources put them all in a similar format, quality control them, factor them if needed, and then certify and release them to the public for use so that anybody can use it. Anybody can use the certified data. It also adds an element of control so that there's a centralized organization that is certifying, hey, this data is good to be used for X, Y, and Z purposes. And then if we want to send it to the Federal Highway Administration's TMAS system. So what we've done is we've built a robust system, and I'll kind of walk through. There's a public viz and then a private portal that is password protected. And we did that to protect the ownership interests of the data. So different entities will collect data and they actually own that data. And we want to make sure that that data is kept essentially under lock and key within certain reasons. So when you log into the system, you have the ability to upload new station locations. You can either upload a manual station location, which is what this looks like, or you're able to upload an EcoCounter based on what you have in EcoVisio. And we've been utilizing the EcoVisio API platform to directly plug in to our system so that we can download stations and counts directly. So all of these fields too are what's required from Federal Highway's TMAS system. So ultimately, at the end of this, TxDOT can submit the data tied up in one neat package with a bow to the Federal Highway Administration, or they can plug it into their own roadway count system. Once you've included a station, what you do then is connect it to the count data itself. So whether you're manually uploading or downloading from the Eco API, this is a fairly automated process. One thing too that is in here is, in order to handle the disparate sources, we actually have coded in the ability to handle all the different types of vendors, whether it's EcoCounter or TrafX or some other vendor. The system will read that data and put it in a unified format. And then this is the Eco API view. So this ties in directly with EcoVisio and gives the user the ability to import their stations and then update the counts whenever they want. When the counts are updated, we provide a quality control process. So it actually shows the data in a Tableau visualization that's built into the system and provides the different quality control tests that the best practice of research and the Federal Highway Administration has required. It gives you some different metadata information and allows you to also see a Google satellite view or street view of your location. If data fail the test, kind of like where the pop-up box at the bottom of the screen, it'll actually tell you what test it's failing, and you can go right to it and flag it as invalid or an abnormal value. And when you do this, you also have the ability to factor data. This is a feature that we're building in, and then certify data. And once you certify data, imagine that you're taking data that is in a quarantined PIN or database, and when you certify it, you release it out into the public. And this is our public view. So when you release that data, it actually puts it into usable statistics that people anywhere in the US or the world or the state of Texas can use. So for example, you can see high-level statistics based on how many counters are in certain counties or TxDOT districts or the state as a whole. Or you can zoom in to a certain county or district and see where all the counts in the area are taking place. This is really, really beneficial, especially in Texas, because you have different localities and entities collecting data. And this shows all the data in one place. So it reduces or eliminates the possibility that you'll have duplication of efforts. Notice there's a couple dots that are really close to one another. In some of those cases, that is where two different entities said this would be a great place to put a counter, and they put counters very close to one another. This can show, the city of Austin say, hey, I want to put a counter in this certain area, but they can see that maybe the MPO or TxDOT has already had a counter location there. And if you click on one of those count locations, you're taken to the data view. And from here, you're actually provided with usable statistics, such as the totals, coming soon, the AADP and AADB models, values, You're getting the total daily summary, and then you're getting useful averages. And you can filter all of this by day of the week, type of account, or just by different date filters. This is very usable information that anybody who needs the information can immediately go and download. And that's the nice thing about this, is you can download individual count stations from the public viz, or if you want, you can actually download bulk stations all at one time to pass off. Finally, this screen kind of shows what we've built in too is the TMAS system from Federal Highway requires very specific data structures and requirements in order to submit it. And what this does is, since we've already quality controlled the data, that's taken care of, and we've met or exceeded the Federal Highway's guidelines, this actually will export the data in bulk in the format that Federal Highway wants it. So we're able to kind of kill a couple birds with one stone here. And this all also imports into TxDOT's count system at the state level. So we've seen a lot of different uses already, but here's some another exhaustive list of possible uses for the counts once they've been quality controlled and kind of put into a usable format. You have everything from just basic measuring facility usage and safety to project prioritization, site evaluation, different things like that. So that is all for me. Thank you so much, and I'm going to be around to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for providing a perspective, Phil. It's greatly appreciated, and I think I can speak for a lot of people to say that you have quite an enviable QA/QC process and data visualization process, so it's really nice. We have about 8 minutes left, during which time we can field questions that have been slowly coming in throughout today's webinar. And for that, I will hand it to Amelia from the League to share those questions.
Great, thank you. Just to preface, we have gotten a ton of questions, so thank you everyone for all your interest. And I apologize in advance because I know we're not going to be able to answer all of these, but well, I'll download them and share them with the speakers and do our best to get answers out to folks if we don't get to you. I'll start with Phil, just since we were looking at your information most recently. Well, before you got to the public facing side, we got a couple questions about whether that was publicly available. So thank you for including that in your presentation. We also got some questions just for clarification about how much of that any EcoCounter customer could develop versus what you developed in-house. So maybe that's a question for both you and Matt. And Matt, if you want to talk a little bit about the Visio side that all EcoCounter customers get, that would be great.
Do you want to go ahead first, Phil, and then I can go after?
Sure. So what we did is we plugged into EcoVisio's API. So we're pulling data. We get permission from all of the entities. That's one of the things when a city or an MPO registers with us, we send an email to EcoCounter saying, hey, they've given us permission to pull their data for them into our system. And once that happens, EcoCounter releases that data, and then we kind of have access. We can read, we can't write over things. So it pulls it into our system so that we can blend it with all the different counters. So for example, if you're a city and you use both EcoCounters and Trafex counters combined, we can pull that all into one system. And we designed all of that in-house.
From an EcoCounter perspective, Phil mentioned a couple of times EcoVisio, and that is our online data analysis platform, which your counts are sent from the counter itself on the ground straight to EcoVisio, the data analysis platform, and then the sort of like online dashboards and online data analysis modules that are there for you ready, and you can adjust your data, play with your data, do before and after counts, look at last year's data, look at yesterday's data, visualize it in a bunch of different ways. And then if you're looking to get a bit more creative with it, for example, or you have specific needs in-house, you can download that data in Excel format, for example, and plug it into your existing database. Or I guess to go even further, you could connect it to your servers with an API or something like that. So a variety of different ways to get your data.
Great, thank you. We got a question early on about centralized sources for national bike count figures. And again, I think, Matt, you might be the best person, but if anybody else wants to chime in on basically, is there a national database, and are most state DOTs tracking usage specifically right now during the health crisis, and how ridership has changed ridership? And yeah, I'll let you guys answer first.
So I think if that question is referring to sort of open data, as far as I'm aware, the answer is no. There's no like centralized national database of or like open data of bike counts. Going to the state levels, many states are tracking counts and are bringing those together, either at the municipal level or the regional level, done by the MPO, something like that, and then fed up to the state level. Some states of which make them public, such as what Phil was describing, but at the national level, not so much. Maybe worth digging into sort of the city level or the state level to get that data. Only other resource I can think of is that actually on our website, we have a map that has day-to-day bike counts for cities that have display counters. So those are like the big counters that say the number of bikes that have passed today or yesterday, for example. And we have a map, an interactive map that has that data on it, and many cities across the US. So it's a tool that can be used for open data. But maybe someone else has something to add here.
I'll add to, the Federal Highway Administration is trying to develop their TMAS, traffic monitoring analysis system. They've opened up modules where it can receive non-motorized data. However, right now it's not a requirement for states or entities to submit to that, and it's not necessarily open, because that's the same system that, if you're familiar with HPMS data, where car counts essentially come from at the national level, that's where that system is. At some point in the future, if I were to read the tea leaves, it might become required for states to submit some sort of non-motorized counting, but I think we're several years away from that. There are several states that have systems. I mean, Oregon has a similar system. Texas has a similar system. North Carolina has a similar system. I think Colorado and Minnesota are the other ones that have systems that are similar to what I showed, and they're tracking it. The level of openness is still kind of dependent upon state by state.
Great, thanks. And we actually had a follow-up question from, I think, the same person, asking about how the league was communicating fresh bike counts to the media, given the sort of changes in transportation right now. And yes, that is actually the #1 media question we're getting as a national organization right now, is proof that you know, people are changing the way they're traveling and moving, and that biking is up. And so we're working with, we've reached out to, you know, EcoCounter, obviously. We also have a partnership with Strava Metro, and we've, you know, tried to get some national level data from them as well, to share it with the media. And so, yeah, we're looking for every media or every data source we have to to make the case that, you know, biking is obviously essential, and especially right now, a really necessary form of transportation and recreation for people. So thanks for that question. We have 1 minute left, and I'm struggling to find a final question, because we do have so many. So I think I'm going to actually wrap it up there. And I again apologize to everybody that we don't have more time for questions, but we will download these and email them out. We'll also be able to reach out to the full list. So maybe we'll just make sure everybody gets the questions and answers to these. And I put in the chat box, but just so everybody knows, we'll be sharing out the recording along with a PDF of the slides. We got a couple requests for specific charts that you all shared, and a transcript of the recording will also be available. So thanks to those who attended live, and if you're watching the recording later, feel free to reach out to our speakers. I hope I can say that if you have additional follow-up questions. These are great resources and really a wonderful collection of information shared today. Thanks again to EcoCounter for putting this together and assembling this great lineup for the National Bike Summit and for this much broader audience today. We're really excited that we were able to offer it to so many more people. So Matt, I don't know if you have any other closing remarks.
Just thank you very much to our presenters and to the League, and yeah, for putting on this great webinar at such last minute notice on such difficult circumstances. And yeah, thank you very much. I hope we can get to your questions by email or something.
Great. Thanks all. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Right.